Okay, so in the last video I talked about the sensory systems a little bit. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about um, how our brain makes sense of those things, or the perception part of sensory and perception. Okay. Um, your book spends some time pointing out that our brain is not always the brightest thing in the entire universe. In fact, we can trick it pretty easily. Here's a picture where we have point A in the distance. We have point B and point C. Question which line is longer. And of course, point C, A to C looks way longer than B to A. But if you put them together, what you find is that they're actually the same length. And your book has a lot of examples of this, that sometimes what we think we see is not exactly how the world is. And I'm not going to go through all of these things. Um, and I just want to kind of touch on some concepts that I think are particularly interesting. Um, Again, here's another example of what we talked about. Which monster is bigger? And the back one looks much bigger than the front one, but if you put them right on top of each other, they're the exact same size. Something about the perspective of him being further back down this hallway makes him look bigger, but they're the same size. Um, okay, so this is a thing I really want to talk about. I think there's a test question about this. Um, is it's called bottom up and top down processing. Okay. Um, and this is something our brain does to help us make sense of the world. Bottom up processing means that if you're doing this, you are looking at every piece of information and you are looking at it and thinking about it, and then that's how you realize what's going on. So like the traditional example would be as kids are learning to read, they have to go through each letter. Like my daughter who's in preschool right now, she will look at the word cat and she will say cat, cat, and then she has to go through each letter. Now, this is good when you're learning things. It helps you figure things out. But if all of us had to read that way, day in, day out, our lives would be horrible because it would take forever. And so once we kind of know something, our brain gets good at it, then we start using what's called top-down processing. This is where we um, use the knowledge that we have to almost make like very quick guesses about things. Okay, so here I'll kind of give some examples on these things. So here the question is, what do you see here? If you're looking in your book, you're cheating. But okay, so we've got all these kind of blobs. And so as an example of bottom-up processing, you are probably looking at each blob, you're looking for a shape, you're trying to make something out, you don't quite see it. Where if I say, do you see the dog in this picture? Then all of a sudden you might see the Dalmatian sniffing the ground. Where here, maybe you couldn't see that. But because I told you, do you see a dog? And since you know what dogs look like, you know what dogs do, then your brain starts to look at these dots in a way, well, what combination of these dots looks like a dog? Okay. Another really good example is when we read, like I mentioned, we're not reading every letter. So periodically you'll see this online, where if the first letter and the last letter of a word are in the right spot, you can pretty much jumble up all the other letters and our brain can figure it out. So if you were reading this, according to research at Cambridge University, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word are. The only important thing is that the first and last letter are in the right place. The rest can be a total mess and you can still read it, and you can still read it without problem. This is because the human mind does not read every letter by itself, but the word as a whole. So that's pretty cool, and makes our life a lot easier, right? I love to read. I usually read like one book every 2 or 3 weeks. Uh, and if I had to read every letter, I would never be able to read that fast. So this is an example of top-down processing, okay? Um, Let me just go through these slides and see if there's anything else I want to touch on. No, I don't think so. So that's just a really brief little lecture on perception. Again, look through your book, look through the other notes, um, and then you'll get a study guide for the first exam, which can kind of help you direct what you need to look at. Uh, but I think as far as this lecture goes, that's it.